Fear is an interesting thing. I was thinking about fear this week. It's one of the 6 basic emotions that every human being is born with. Did you know that? We were all born, and lots of other emotions can come out, but they're all rooted in 6 basic emotions that every human being is programmed with. Joy, sadness, make sure I get these right, anger, surprise, there's one I'm forgetting, and fear. But fear's in there. Disgust, that's the one I missed. Joy, anger, disgust, sadness, surprise, and fear. We are all born and programmed with these emotions inside of us. I read an article this week from the National Institute of Health which basically defines fear as a 2-part process. First, threat-related stimuli are triggered in the brain. And second, we immediately jump to behave or to act or react in a way to adapt or cope with that stimuli being activated. In other words, fear starts in the brain, but almost immediately there's a reaction to it. We recoil, we say something, we move out of the way. There's a number of ways you can respond to fear. But threat-related stimuli, and we react. That's the basics of what fear looks like. Mark tells us a story that the disciples, one evening, are overcome with fear. They'd been with Jesus all day, been preaching and teaching, and he's tired at this point. And they take him, interestingly, Mark tells us, just as he was. I wonder what that meant, just probably dog-tired. They go on a boat, and they're going to the other side of the water. And in the process of sailing, a windstorm arises, a squall, if you will. And the disciples are afraid. I mean, they think the boat's going to tip, they're going to drown. Who knows what's going to happen? Meanwhile, here's Jesus in the front of the boat sleeping. So the 2-part process. Threat-related stimuli are activated in the disciples. They are now afraid. How do they react? They look at their teacher and say, "Don't you care that we're about to drown? Don't you care?" They're afraid. Jesus looks at them and looks at the storm and, "Peace, be still," he says. And he asks them this question, "Why are you so afraid?" And maybe Jesus asks us that same question sometimes. Why in your life are you so afraid? We're afraid of a lot of things. I was thinking about that this week. I didn't really know where to go with the sermon or what to do. And then this fear kind of starts to grow inside of me, like, I'm not going to have anything to say and, waste your Sunday morning. But it occurred to me this week in thinking about fear, I think there are 3 basic fears that we all struggle with at some point or another. Lots of other fears can come out of these 3 fears. But if you sit here today and say, "I've never dealt with any of those 3 fears," you're probably lying to yourself. These are 3 very basic fears I think we all struggle with. The first is fear of the unknown. Fear of the unknown. Anxiety is essentially defined as a fear of the unknown. All of us have anxiety at some level or another. Certain situations cause us to be more anxious than others. Some of us struggle with anxiety in our daily lives. I mean, we all have it to a varying degree, but anxiety is simply that, a fear of what we don't know is about to happen. Fear of the unknown. My good friend Jim reminded me this week that the things that happen around us have a great influence on the things that happen inside of us. You ever thought about that? The stuff that happens around you in your life has a lot of influence over what happens inside of you. Fear of the unknown, when we don't understand what's happening around us, can make us anxious on the inside. Fear of the unknown. There are a lot of people who struggle with very unhealthy relationships or unhealthy circumstances, but they stay in them because y'all know the old saying, "The devil you know is always better than the devil you don't know." We will stay in a bad situation simply because we know it and understand it. And the possibility of getting out of it launches us into this unknown realm that causes us more fear than the bad thing we're living in. Fear of the unknown can be paralyzing. Fear of the unknown, that which we don't know or understand. We anticipate it. I don't know about you, but I'm someone that I always jump to worst case scenarios in my brain. You know, something I don't know is going to happen, and I all of a sudden think it's going to be the very worst of it. That's fear of the unknown. Which leads us to the second fear that we all struggle with, whether we want to admit it or not. That's fear of the other. Fear of the other. That person who looks different, acts different, worships differently, believes differently, comes from a different background. That person whose skin color may be different from us, comes from a different country. Y'all know xenophobia is literally defined as fear of the foreigner. We are afraid of people who are different. We don't like to admit that because that comes from a broken place in us that I think exists in all of us, that we fear the other. Whether we want to admit it or not, some of us struggle with it worse than others, but we all carry within us a fear of the other because we don't understand them. They're different. We don't get it, right? Like we're good with our people, our family, our tribe, our church, our race, our nation. We understand that stuff. But the people who are different, the other, it goes hand in hand with that fear of the unknown. I wonder sometimes if the reason we don't fear the other isn't because there's something wrong with the other, but maybe it's because there's something wrong with us. We're afraid of the other because it makes us admit our own ignorance, that we don't understand them. And nobody likes to admit that they're ignorant, do they? I mean, y'all don't like, that's a place of vulnerability that's really uncomfortable to get into. But it's there. We don't always understand each other, and so we have a choice. We can either learn or be ignorant. And to fear the other is to live in that ignorance. Fear of the other is a very real thing. We know that because we can trace the history of communities based on fear of the other. If you've lived in a community for any amount of time, especially here in the South, you can trace the history of neighborhoods. Neighborhoods rise, neighborhoods fall based on how people move around town. Now, a lot of times, this is a good starter neighborhood economically. But then, when you get your family established and you get that promotion and that job, you're ready to move up, right, to the next neighborhood. That can be true. But there's another truth that we don't like to admit. Sometimes we don't just move because of economic opportunity. Sometimes we move because someone who's different has moved into the neighborhood. And slowly but surely, everyone leaves the neighborhood. We have a phrase for that. It's called white flight, because quite often it is white people who move when the neighborhood changes. This is how we define the good side of town versus the not good side of town. Every town has that, by the way. I can vividly remember, it is still there in Columbus, Georgia, where I grew up. There is one road that essentially runs through town that you pretty much know everything on that side of the road is mostly lower income, minority neighborhoods, and everything on this side of the road is higher income, mostly white neighborhoods. Now there's variances in there, but that's essentially like this unspoken dividing line. And every town has one of those or more. Why? Fear of the other. Fear of the other. So if we struggle with fear of the unknown, and then it gets born into fear of the other, which brings up all these prejudices that we don't like to admit are in us, but that fear can get the best of us and let those prejudices come out, how do we grow beyond that? I think it comes in the third fear that we all carry with us, and that's the fear of change. We are afraid to change. To change is literally to disturb a state of homeostasis, which is a great biological term, meaning a state of perfect balance. We're biological creatures who all long for homeostasis because it's just comfortable. It's where we want to be. And to change is to disturb homeostasis, to grow, But you can't grow without a disturbance. You know, seeds don't grow in the ground and produce flowers unless the shell of that seed is somehow burst open. We don't grow as human beings. We don't grow as disciples of Jesus Christ unless something tears us open. And we're afraid of it. We're afraid of it because sometimes, even in our ignorance, that's more comfortable than changing to grow. Bishop Will Willimon wrote a book recently dealing with issues of race, and he tells a really amazing story in it. Willimon tells the story of how his life was changed in terms of how he understood race, at least for him. He was 14 years old, and he went to a summer youth conference at Lake Junaluska. This was back in the, 60s or so. And it's the way that the camping area was designed was you go to a room and you have a roommate for the week, right? And so he goes into his room and he's kind of caught off guard because there sitting on the other bed is a 14-year-old African-American boy. Willimon had grown up in Greenville, South Carolina, in the mostly white areas of town, going to a white church, living the white lifestyle. He just didn't expect to see a young African-American boy. And as luck would have it, that same boy there at Lake Junaluska in North Carolina, that boy was living in Greenville, South Carolina too, just a few blocks away from Willimon. Couldn't believe it. And he said he stayed up with the boy almost until dawn, hearing his stories about living a few blocks away, but never knowing he was there. About going to his church, not Willimon's church. About playing on the ball fields he was allowed to play on, not the ones that Willimon played on. About going to his school, not going to Willimon's school. And he said it was as though he was describing a Greenville, South Carolina, that he never knew existed. This boy changed him. He very eloquently writes in the book, he says that his worldview was shattered and broken open skillfully by this boy. And as Willimon says, he in that night was ministered to by the other. Because that boy took him where he needed to go and had always avoided. He didn't realize in his ignorance, he didn't realize that he had no idea what life for African Americans was like. And this boy very gently took him into that realization and changed him. And he was changed forever. I mentioned that we have a breakfast on July the 4th. Now, this is my song and dance time to recruit volunteers. But I want to offer you, even challenge you, something more than volunteering. Because there's different ways we can go about volunteering. The truth is, volunteering naturally makes us feel good. Okay? Giving of your time for the sake of somebody else always makes you feel good. But I want to challenge you to come on July the 4th and give a couple of hours of the morning. And I don't want you to come for the goal of feeling good. In fact, I hope you don't feel good when you leave here. I'm serious. I hope you feel uncomfortable. Because I want to challenge you to do more than just keep to the volunteer side of the room or just talk to people who look like you and church members that you come to worship with. I want to challenge you to listen to someone else's story. To learn a name. To talk. Because in that story, from someone who looks different from you, your life might be changed, opened up, to learn that there is a life in Savannah, Georgia, that you never knew existed, to be disturbed, but to know that in that disturbance, you're being changed by the power of God. Fear is a real thing in life. It's something we all struggle with from time to time. It's a very real human thing. And there are moments in our life that it feels like Jesus is asleep or that he doesn't care. And we just sometimes want to shake him and say, don't you care about me? I'm struggling with this. Circumstances that we don't fully understand, people that we don't understand. The notion that somehow we have to change and that hurts, to grow, well up like storms inside of us. But hear this good news. In those moments, the voice of Christ comes again and again and again. Peace. Be still. You don't have to be so afraid. You are loved. You are free to love others. Now go and do it. Amen. Hey, thanks for watching the latest sermon here at Historic Trinity Church in Savannah, Georgia. I'm Reverend Ben Gosden. I'm the senior pastor here at Trinity Church. And I want to take this opportunity to invite you. If you're ever in Savannah, Georgia, we would love for you to visit us on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. We're located on Telfair Square, been here since 1848. Also, you can check out the comments below for a way to give if you feel so led. Again, you're welcome anytime here at Trinity Church.